long ago, Chinese car brands started showing up at the Nürburgring, one of the most famous and brutal racing circuits in the world. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The Xiaomi SU7 Ultra, a sedan built by a smartphone company, took the production EV lap record from Porsche, beating the Taycan Turbo GT by 3 seconds. Then BYD's Yangwang U9 Extreme arrived, a Chinese hypercar with over 3,000 horsepower, and became the first production electric vehicle in history to lap the circuit in under 7 minutes, taking the record from the Xiaomi. Then Porsche fired back with a Manthe Racing Special Edition Taycan and reclaimed the overall production EV crown by just under 4 seconds. One of the greatest performance car manufacturers on Earth had to build a special edition car just to stay ahead. And just a few weeks ago, Xiaomi came back again, not with a sports car, but with a family SUV. The YU7 GT 990 horsepower, it set the fastest production SUV lap time ever recorded at the Nürburgring, beating records previously set by the Audi RSQ8 Performance and the Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT. Chinese car makers, multiple records on a circuit that Europe considered its own for a century. This is the story of how China went from making cars nobody wanted to building cars that are making the rest of the world pay very close attention. To understand where China is now, you have to understand where it was. The history of the global car industry is essentially a story about everyone except China. It starts in America. Henry Ford's assembly line in 1913 didn't just build cars, it invented modern manufacturing. For decades, American cars defined what a car was supposed to be: big, powerful, confident. The open road as a birthright. Then came Germany, precision engineering as a philosophy. BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche, Volkswagen, brands that didn't just make cars but made you feel something about the cars. The Autobahn culture. The idea that driving could be an experience worth caring about. Then Japan rewrote the rules entirely in the 1970s and 80s. Toyota, Honda, Nissan, reliable, efficient, affordable, and embarrassingly well made. Japanese manufacturers didn't beat Western car makers by being flashier. They beat them by being better at the boring stuff: quality control, efficiency, delivering exactly what they promised every time. And through all of this, China watched. China had factories, China had workers, China had, by the 2000s, the largest car market in the world. More cars were being sold in China than anywhere else on the planet, but they were German cars, Japanese cars, American cars, even Korean cars. Chinese brands? They existed, but in the minds of consumers, including Chinese consumers, they were the option you chose when you couldn't afford anything better. That perception wasn't unfair, it was accurate. And everyone, including the Chinese automotive industry, knew it. Here's something that Western coverage of the Chinese car industry almost always misses. In China, the car you drive is not just transportation. It is a statement, a signal, a message to everyone who sees you pull up, that you have, as the Chinese say, face, mianzi, the social currency of status and respect. And for a long time, nothing said, "I have arrived," quite like a German badge on your hood. A BMW 5 Series in the driveway meant something. A Mercedes E-Class meant something. An Audi A6, which became practically the unofficial car of Chinese government officials, meant a lot. These weren't just cars. They were proof. Proof that you had done well enough to afford the real thing, not some domestic alternative. This wasn't unique to China. Status signaling through foreign luxury goods is a phenomenon in many developing economies. But in China, given the size of the market and the speed of the wealth creation, the effect was enormous. German car makers in particular made more profit from China than from any other market in the world. For years, China was essentially subsidizing European automotive profits. Domestic Chinese brands understood this perfectly. They tried to compete on price. They tried to improve quality. And slowly, very slowly, they started to earn some respect in their home market. By the 2010s, brands like Geely, Chery, and Great Wall had built a real customer base. Chinese buyers were starting to accept that a domestic car could be good enough. Not aspirational, not prestigious, but good enough. It was progress. But it wasn't a revolution. The revolution required something else entirely. Let's talk about China's first serious attempt to build an EV industry, because it did not go well. In the early 2010s, the Chinese government made a strategic decision. Electric vehicles were the future, and China was going to be part of it. They rolled out generous subsidies for any company willing to build EVs. The policy was well-intentioned. The results were not. What followed was one of the more spectacular examples of subsidy farming in industrial history. Companies appeared almost overnight, not because their founders had a burning passion for electric mobility, but because the government was essentially handing out money to anyone who could bolt together something with a battery and four wheels. The cars that emerged from this era were, to put it charitably, not great. Poor build quality, terrible range, software that made a Nokia 3310 look cutting edge. Chinese consumers, who can be extraordinarily blunt in their product reviews, were not impressed. The EV dream was turning into a punchline. And then something happened that nobody in the Chinese government had planned. Or maybe they had planned it all along, depending on who you ask. There's a well-known concept in business called the catfish effect. You take a tank full of comfortable, lazy fish, and you throw in a catfish. The catfish is faster, hungrier, and has no interest in letting the other fish relax. Suddenly, every fish in the tank is swimming harder. Not because they want to, because they have to. In 2018, the Chinese government threw a catfish into its automotive industry. The catfish was named Elon Musk. Here's what's remarkable about the Tesla-China deal. Both sides needed each other desperately, and both sides knew it. Tesla at the time was struggling to scale production. Building cars at volume in America was proving expensive and chaotic. Musk needed a manufacturing base that could produce at speed, at scale, and at a cost that made the numbers work. China offered exactly that. World-class manufacturing infrastructure, an enormous engineering workforce, and a supply chain ecosystem unlike anywhere else on Earth. The Chinese government, meanwhile, wanted something specific in return, not just jobs, not just tax revenue. They wanted Tesla to bring its entire ecosystem, its suppliers, its manufacturing processes, its quality standards, and transplant them onto Chinese soil. The deal that was eventually struck gave Tesla something remarkable: wholly foreign-owned factory rights in China, which had never been granted before. In exchange, Tesla built its Shanghai Gigafactory and opened the door to hundreds of Chinese component suppliers who suddenly had to meet Tesla-grade quality requirements. The effect on the domestic EV industry was immediate and brutal. Suddenly, Chinese consumers had a genuinely world-class electric car to compare everything else against. And everything else didn't compare well. The subsidy farming era was effectively over. Companies that had been building mediocre EVs to collect government money were now competing against a product that people actually wanted to buy. The weak ones collapsed. The serious ones got to work. Here's the part of this story that has a genuinely satisfying punchline. Back in 2011, Elon Musk was asked in an interview what he thought of BYD. At that point, already one of China's largest car companies. Musk's response was to laugh. Not a polite laugh, a proper laugh. Then he said,
Have you seen their car?
I have seen their
"Have you seen their cars?"
In fact, at the Berkshire
It was not a
Hathaway meeting,
compliment.
I saw their cars.
Fast forward to 2023. A journalist asked Musk about that interview. He paused. And then, to his credit, he said that BYD had become a serious competitor and that he had underestimated them. From "Have you seen their cars?" to serious competitor. That, in one anecdote, is the arc of the entire Chinese EV industry. Here's the strategic insight that makes everything else make sense. For decades, the reason Chinese car makers couldn't compete with Germany, Japan, or America wasn't effort or investment. It was accumulated expertise, a century of combustion engine development, thousands of engineers who spent their entire careers optimizing fuel injection, transmission feel, exhaust dynamics. an entire industrial culture built around making internal combustion engines progressively better. That expertise was real, and it was genuinely very hard to replicate quickly. But here's what an electric car doesn't have: a combustion engine, no gearbox, no exhaust system, no fuel injection, no century of accumulated combustion expertise required. The things that German and Japanese engineers had spent generations perfecting suddenly became irrelevant. The playing field didn't level. It was replaced with a completely different playing field. And on this new field, China had something nobody else had: the world's most advanced battery supply chain. CATL and BYD had been building batteries for years, not originally for cars, but for consumer electronics. When the EV transition arrived, China didn't need to catch up on batteries. It was already ahead. The 100-year head start that Detroit, Stuttgart, and Tokyo had built, it didn't transfer. This is where Western coverage of Chinese EVs usually gets lazy. It picks BYD, talks about how it's outselling Tesla, and calls it a day. The reality is an entire ecosystem of brands, each with a distinct identity, a distinct strategy, and a distinct vision of what a car should be. If Chinese EVs were a country, BYD would be its capital city. NIO went premium. Battery swapping instead of charging. Pull into a station, swap your entire battery pack in under 5 minutes, drive away. Its showrooms feel like Apple stores. Its owner community has its own app, its own events, its own culture. NIO didn't just build a car, it built a lifestyle. Li Auto figured out something competitors missed for years. Most Chinese car buyers are parents. They want space, they want a refrigerator in the armrest, they want a screen in the headrest for the kids, they want to drive 1,000 kilometers without stopping. Li Auto builds cars for real life. And real life involves children, groceries, and road trips to grandma's. XPeng bet on software and autonomous driving. Xiaomi, yes, the phone company, launched a car that sold out in minutes because 17 million people already trusted the brand with their phones and laptops, and Huawei, which technically doesn't make cars, makes the software and intelligence layer that powers AI vehicles. And their cockpit experience is arguably the best automotive software in the world right now. Each of these brands is solving a different problem for a different family. Together, they form something the Western automotive industry has never faced before: a coordinated, multi-front assault on every segment of the market simultaneously. Here's an angle that almost nobody talks about when discussing Chinese EVs, but which might be the most important one. China is extraordinarily good at building internet products. WeChat, TikTok, Red Note. These apps are obsessively user-centric. They iterate constantly. They respond to what users actually want, not what product teams think users should want. The feedback loop between user behavior and product development is faster in Chinese tech than almost anywhere else. Chinese EV brands brought exactly this philosophy to car making. Traditional Western automakers design a car, manufacture it, sell it, and release the next version in 3 to 5 years. Chinese EV brands work more like software companies: software updates over the air, new features added monthly, customer feedback incorporated into the next model cycle that arrives not in 3 years, but sometimes in 12 months. The result is cars that feel less like finished products and more like living ones. Continuously improving, continuously responding. This drives experienced car enthusiasts slightly mad. And it absolutely delights first-time car buyers who have never known anything different. Something is happening in China right now that will shape the global car industry for the next 20 years, and almost nobody is writing about it. A generation of young Chinese people is buying their first car, and that car is an EV, not as a compromise, not as a second choice, as simply what a car is. They have never owned a petrol car. They have no nostalgia for engine sound, no attachment to gear shifts, no loyalty to exhaust notes. Their entire framework for what a car should feel like, perform like, and cost to run is built entirely on electric experience. When they sit in a petrol car, they notice what's missing, not the other way around. This matters because the criticism of EVs, the legitimate criticism, from experienced drivers who grew up with combustion engines, comes largely from people comparing EVs to something they already love. The torque delivery feels different. The driving dynamics are different. The sound is different, and different to someone who loves what already exists often feels like worse. But for a generation with no prior reference point, an EV's instant acceleration isn't a compromise for missing engine noise. It's simply what fast feels like, and it feels extraordinary. This generational shift is not unique to China, but in China, given the scale, the speed of EV adoption, and the size of the youth market, it is happening faster and at greater volume than anywhere else. The consumers who will define what a car means for the next 50 years are, right now, forming their opinions in China, in EV showrooms, behind the wheels of BYDs and NIO T5s and Xiaomi SU7s. One of the most common criticisms of EVs in the West is infrastructure. Where do you charge? How long does it take? What happens on a long trip through the countryside? These are legitimate questions in Europe and America, countries where the petrol infrastructure is so deeply embedded that replacing it feels almost impossible. Every petrol station, every garage, every mechanic shop represents decades of investment in a system that EVs need to replace. China had a different starting point, and it used it. China's ability to build infrastructure at speed and scale is one of the most documented phenomena in modern economic history. High-speed rail networks, built in years. Cities, constructed in months. When the government decided charging infrastructure was a national priority, the rollout was not a decade-long policy debate. It happened. Today, China has more EV charging points than the rest of the world combined. Fast chargers that add hundreds of kilometers of range in minutes are common, not just in cities, but along highways across the country. The infrastructure anxiety that makes Western consumers hesitate simply doesn't exist in the same way for Chinese buyers. This is not a small advantage. Infrastructure is often what determines whether a technology succeeds in the mass market, not the technology itself. China built the foundation that makes mass EV adoption not just possible, but natural. We started this video at the Nürburgring, but the lap records are only part of the story. What they represent is a shift in ambition. From a domestic industry building affordable cars for Chinese families, to brands now competing at every level of the global market simultaneously. BYD is the best-selling EV brand in multiple European countries. Xiaomi's cars sell out within minutes of launch. Chinese EVs are arriving in Southeast Asia, Latin America, Australia, and Europe, not as budget alternatives, but increasingly as genuine first choices. The Nürburgring records matter because they signal something the sales numbers confirm. Chinese car makers are no longer playing catch-up. They are setting the pace. The culture and heritage that European brands carry, the emotional mythology built over decades, cannot be replicated overnight. Chinese brands know this. The serious ones are already thinking about it. But the ceiling? Nobody knows where it is anymore. And that, for an industry that thought it did, is the most significant development of all. Now, we've spent most of this video talking about what China got right, and that's a real story. But it would be a disservice to pretend the picture is entirely rosy, because it isn't. And frankly, Chinese consumers themselves would be the first to tell you that. Here's something that surprises most Western observers. The debate about EVs inside China is fierce, genuinely fierce. Not everyone is a convert, not even close. A significant portion of Chinese consumers, including younger ones, remain deeply skeptical of EVs. Their argument isn't about price or features, it's about time. Internal combustion engines have been refined over nearly 100 years, millions of accidents, millions of miles, decades of safety data. We know how petrol cars behave in a crash, in extreme weather, on a long mountain descent with failing brakes. We've had a century to find the problems and fix them. EVs have had less than a decade of mass market existence. The battery fire incidents, though statistically rare, stick in people's minds. The long-term degradation of battery packs is still not fully understood at scale. The behavior of these vehicles in edge cases that haven't happened yet is, by definition, unknown. For families making a decision about what to put their children in every morning, that uncertainty is not irrational. It is reasonable. This debate is not a Western import. It is happening loudly, openly, and sometimes quite rudely in Chinese comment sections, on Weibo, in family group chats. Chinese consumers are not a monolith of EV enthusiasm. They are a demanding, skeptical, and vocal market. And the EV industry has to earn their trust, not assume it. Then there is the prestige question, which hasn't gone away as much as EV enthusiasts would like to believe. Walk into any luxury car dealership in Shanghai or Beijing today. The Ferrari, the Lamborghini, the Porsche 911. They still carry something that a BYD Yangwang, for all its technological impressiveness, has not yet fully replicated. Call it heritage, call it mythology, call it the irrational but very human desire to own something with 100 years of racing history behind it. Whatever you call it, it exists. And it matters to a segment of buyers who have the money to choose anything they want and still choose Stuttgart or Maranello. The honest truth is that Chinese EVs have largely won the practical argument on range, on features, on price, on software, on interior space. The case is genuinely strong. They are still building the emotional argument, the driving culture, the heritage, the kind of irrational love that makes a person spend 3 times more than they need to on a car simply because of what it means to them. That takes time. It cannot be iterated into existence overnight. And the Chinese brands that understand this, that know they are not just selling a product but trying to earn a place in people's hearts, are the ones most likely to be still standing in 20 years. So where does this leave us? In the middle of something that hasn't finished happening yet. The rise of Chinese EVs is real. The technology is real. The speed of development is real. The infrastructure advantage is real. And the ambition, from affordable family cars to Nürburgring lap records, is very, very real. But so are the open questions. The long-term reliability data still being written. The trust still being earned. The emotional culture still being built. The skeptics, inside China and outside it, who are watching closely and are not yet fully convinced. This is not a story with a final chapter. It is a story in progress. What is not in doubt is the direction. 100 years ago, if you wanted the best car in the world, you looked to America. Then Germany, then Japan. The idea that one day you might look to China would have seemed, to put it gently, unlikely. Elon Musk laughed at BYD in 2011. He stopped laughing. That's usually how these stories go.